we're doing electronic bank reconciliation made easy. Um, and I'm going to do just a few of the slides. There's really only 4 slides. But the setup is fairly easy. The challenge that most people have is actually figuring out all of the different codes and things to make it look at the file itself. But once you get over that hurdle, you never have to worry about it again. So we're going to go through the checkbook setup from the bank rec side of it. So what electronic bank rec needs to do. We're going to look at how you set up a configuration file within electronic bank rec, where you put your download file, and how you link that together. And then we're going to run a reconcile, or as we say, Jessica is going to run a reconcile. So going through that, the checkbook setup is really, there's 2 pieces on it that electronic bank rec wants. It wants the bank account number and it wants the bank ID. And the bank ID is basically, let me pop out of this and go into, let's see, I'm going to, well, we'll go through this and then I'll get, I don't know why it's doing this, but anyhow, the, let me go back one. The bank ID is really more of the address, the routing number, all of that information. I'll show you how you get to that in your GP setup. But the bank account is needed, and the reason why is because if you have multiple bank accounts on the same bank, you can actually get a file from them that holds all of the different account numbers. And that way, then when you're uploading your files, it will actually use the same file, but it will parse out the data for the checkbook you're using. So it's kind of cool because you don't have to do separate files per bank account if you have one bank that's associated with it. So 2 fields in your checkbook setup, easy peasy. The bank configuration is where you spend most of your time. You have 2 different file formats that you can use, a BAI, which is a preset format that most banks use. They've gone through and they've put in what most banks get on files, and have created that file format for you. We will look at one of those. And then you also have a user defined one that you can set up for your own purposes. If you just, like, a lot of people use that if they're just going to copy paste out of their um, window from when they go on their website for their bank, they can copy all of the stuff that has come through and just paste that into a file, and then they can use a user defined file type for that. So we're going to take a look at that. And then the download maintenance is where you connect all those together. So 3 steps for connectivity: the checkbook and bank ID, the configurator, and then your download maintenance. This basically attaches everything together. What you want to call your download, what bank format you're going to use, or what you called your configurator. The bank ID itself, again, is attached to your checkbook, and then what checkbook you want to use this on. And again, you can add as many checkbooks as you want to for the same bank ID. So it's all based on that account number that's used in the file itself, and then where you're going to see that file from. And then you just go in and you reconcile it. So let's see, can I get out of this? Nope, that's not the right one. Oh, goodness. I am going to switch my screen to my main and bring up my GP from here. Jessica, you want to show your GP? I'm going to unmute her. Jessica.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't have the option to present yet.
Hold on. Now you do.
No. Okay, so this is my Dynamics GP. And
Let's
so the
go
way
in. Yeah, let's go into the
into the
configurator.
configurator. Okay, so first, before we configure, let me just show you the file that I'm using. Just so you can get an idea. Now, although this is an Excel, this is kind of an example of what my bank would do with little modification here and there. This is more of a user defined. If you are a corporate company, you probably have treasury with your bank. Your bank will normally give you a BAI file. And so this type of configuration is not as difficult, so to speak, but you can use a user defined file as well. So this is my user-defined file, and what I've done is gone into GP, and using that information, I have created a configuration here on my Uptown Trust account. So everything here is a detail record. I've indicated that it is a tab delimited file because I do save my Excel as a tab delimited. And here I have all of the transaction or the different columns that I have. So in my case, I've gone ahead and just said, you know, I only have one account to reconcile for this bank. So I've made my account number my indicator for the detail record. In addition, there's a codes entry screen. So my transaction code is in the second column. And what I've done here is said when my bank says that it's an AWD or a CHK, that's actually going to represent a check in my GP. On the deposit side, I have an RDP for a remote deposit or a DEP for when somebody goes into the bank and makes a deposit. And so those do match my file here in this type right here. So using that information, I've then gone and told the system here in my download maintenance that when I use this bank format, and I've given it an ID. Here's the bank ID that I have. Now this bank ID is actually attached to your checkbook, and that's how it can find, as Tammy showed, where the bank account is, which bank account we're reconciling. There's my bank ID right there. So here on my bank ID that I've selected here, I've gone ahead and added this checkbook, and it did verify that this checkbook does attach to this bank ID, and here is the location where I actually keep my text file. If you use a web browser or something and you download a file, this is basically just the place where you do a download, and then the system will pick up that file after the download. All right, so the next step is where all the magic happens. So here in transaction downloads, this is where I tell the system to either I can do it through a communication link, or I can just go ahead and say, hey, pick up my file that I downloaded. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my download ID, which in my case is Uptown Trust. And then I'm going to click this download button, and it's going to want a confirmation number. So I'm just going to go ahead and use today's date. And I'm going to click on that it was successful. And what it's telling me here is that there was one record that it couldn't match to the different transaction types that are available. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK here and take a look at what that record is. So my file did have a header row, which of course should not be included as my import because it's not truly a transaction. So I know in this case that this is okay. But what I'd be looking for on this report is to see if there was maybe something where the code didn't match and maybe I just need to go and map that code. Or if there were maybe some bad data or some transactions in there that I need to go and address. I'm going to go ahead and close this screen here. And then what you'll see here is a list of all of the transactions that it pulled in. So you'll notice here I have checks and I have deposits, withdrawals. They're all loaded in there. If for some reason maybe I didn't have a complete file, or I haven't run the reconcile yet, or I want to correct this, you do have the ability in both summary history, where you can see that I did my download. Here's my downloaded record with my confirmation number, or in transactions history. And then this one will actually let you go just by date and time. You can go back and forth, but you'll be able to come in here. And if you wanted to delete that history, you can come here into that summary history and just go ahead, highlight your line and click on delete. That will clean up your history. So now this is the part that everybody's super excited for. This is where the summary, or where the savings are. In the transactions download, I have the button that says reconcile. All that's going to do when I click that button is take you to this screen right here. So I'm just going straight to this screen. I'm going to go ahead and pick my checkbook ID. I'm going to enter in my bank statement ending balance. And I'm going to enter my date. And I'm going to go ahead and click on transactions. And it's going to say, do you want to match by an 8-day grace period? Now, the idea is that from the date you issue out until about 8 days after, it's saying, I will go out and reach out 8 days past that to see if you have any transactions and bring those in. That grace period of 8 days is flexible. There is a way to configure that. You can make it more or less days. I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. And it's giving me a report, and it's telling me that there are some transactions that it could not match. In my case, the transactions it couldn't match were all of my deposits here. So you'll see my deposits are over here. But if I scroll down, all of the checks that were on that statement have been checked to be matched. So I will go through and just mark off the ones that it couldn't reconcile. So that's just an example of what it would look like if it had a problem. And then once I'm completed, I can click my reconcile button, but you'll see right here, my difference is now 0 and the reconciliation is complete.
Nice job, Jess. So like Jess said, I mean, reconciling it, while the setup is a little bit, especially when you're going through the configurator and making sure your file matches what the bank is wanting or what the checkbook is wanting on it, that's a little bit, you know, to go
It
through and do that can be a little bit time consuming, I would say, Jess, right?
Right. It does take a little bit of trial and error, but once you nail that down, you don't have to do it again. And so from that point forward, the reconciliation process is super easy.
Super easy. And I like the ability when it goes through and it reconciles, it shows you what isn't right. Now, the reason why Jessica got the file that wasn't right is because if you notice in her file itself, the deposits were in as negatives. So it did notice that those were negatives and it wasn't going to pull them in because in GP, the type defines what way it goes. So that would be the reason why her deposits did not come in. But if she switched her file and had put them as positive, they would have come in and marked themselves off. So I do like that secondary report where it tells you, I like the fact that when you download it, it tells you all of the stuff that comes in and what didn't come in. So you have a first line defense on what's not going to come in. And then when you do your reconcile, you have a second line defense of showing what didn't mark out of the files that didn't come in. And then you can choose to mark those manually for this time and then fix your configuration so that it doesn't do that again.
Okay, we have a question here.
Ooh, I
And
like questions.
I know, I do too. We've been trying to implement this functionality in our company for a long time, but without success. Our bank and the certain file that she named, so you can probably see that over in the question area,
Mhm.
but seems to be impossible to implement into the other layout in GP. Since the field option in the layout does not match with what is available in GP, is there restrictions about the layouts, or can we help her with that?
So the layout that I showed was a very simple layout, and generally what the banks give you do not match that kind of a simple layout.
Right.
And so there are various things that I found. One of the things that I found was that tab delimited was easier. It really kind of depends on what your bank gives you in the way of the setup. If they give you a BAI file, there shouldn't be much to configure on it. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen again.
And the file types are, and I'm not familiar with these types, but our RBC is what the bank has on the layout is a BA12.
BAI2.
Oh,
A BAI, yeah.
you're right.
It's a
BAI2,
BA2.
right.
Yeah,
So,
unfortunately, the BAI2 is more for your EFT setups. It's for actually doing the files back to the bank, like you're sending a file to the bank. The BAI is really more of the download from what a bank rec would be looking for. So
right.
they don't have the BAI2 just means that you're sending the file to them, and a BAI is they're sending the file to you. Those are the differences between those.
And generally, when your bank does a download, if they are not using the BAI2 format, they could provide you with a document that would explain the different types of transactions. The other thing to note is that most files that do come from a bank have different levels of information. So similar to how when we generate an EFT or an ACH file, there's a letter or a top that says that this is the file header. There's usually a detail line. Sometimes there's a footer line, and there can be a couple of things in between as well. And so the trick to that is that it has to have a record type code indicator. And this is something we got really used to this morning because we kept having a configuration file that failed. So in your file header, you generally have maybe a record type of one. So let's just say that I have a BAI file and it's about 60 characters wide. So I'd say 60. And then over here, I have 120. I can't get it to let me click in here. It might be because I'm doing a BAI. If I do a user defined, there we go. So maybe if I'm using a fixed field, I have 125 characters. And then I could say my record type as a file header. I'm not sure why it's not letting me click in there at the moment. But I should be able to determine the different levels of detail right here in the record type. So, and then I can say, how does it know that that's the record type code? So generally that will be the first error that users usually have, is that they'll have multiple levels and there's some that they don't want to include. And so they don't have to map them, but they still have to indicate that this row shouldn't be pulled in, this row should be pulled in, and where that data is. So that's probably the first advice I would give.
Okay,
Right.
so if the fields aren't matching, that tabulation's okay?
If the, say that again, I'm sorry.
Okay, if the fields aren't matching,
Mm-hmm.
is tabulation okay?
So if you're using a fixed or you're using a tab delimited file, that is one way you can do that, but the fields would have to be delimited as well. So it kind of depends on what that file looks like. You can have comma delimited, you can have tab delimited, or you can have fixed width. And so fixed width, you would have to define where each field stops and starts on the detail that you're trying to bring in for the bank.
Right.
Um,
And the best way to find out what is to just call your bank. Call your bank, talk to a banker and ask them, you know, what kind of data you can pull from or that they could give you to pull. And they're pretty good about having like a set format of how they pull their data and what is required. So you can match it up pretty easily in here. Like they'll say that the first the first five fields are the header, you know, the file header, and then they have the detail that's underneath it, and then a summary footer, and then the account footer at the bottom. So they typically can give you all of that data and then you can match it up here. But if you're having issues like the first question was, you can you can for sure give me a call or give us a call and we can schedule either me or Jessica or even Deb is really good at figuring out banks. She talks bank. It's crazy.
Okay, is there more field types than currency and date?
Is there more field types and currency and date? Oh, in the format piece of it? Yeah, do a drop down on your format on one of those, Jess.
yeah, so so you only have to specify a format if it is a dollar value or if it is a date value. It won't
Right.
let you specify it for anything else. So it'll just tell you that format is invalid. But there are only the currency and the date formats available.
Correct.
So
Okay.
those are the only fields where it asks you what the format is so that it can match it up.
Okay,
Um,
perfect.
one thing that you can note is that a lot of banks will do a QuickBooks file. And even though a QuickBooks file, it's actually an XML file, so it's a QBO, and those still can be used. I'm just going to show you an example. You can open this in Excel, and don't laugh, this is, you know, my actual bank account section here, or my American Express bill, I should say. But a QBO file, whether it's a credit card file or a bank, it's just an XML file. And so if you can get it to this point where you can open in Excel, you can do a file and save it as a tab delimited. We can help map that information in as well, because we still have record indicators, we still have information that you know, if we need to set an account number, we can do that. But that information, we can actually try to use those to try to map them as well.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. I have another question here. Are you able to configure rules that would add in the reoccurring adjustments? Things like, you know, bank transactions or fees or credit card payments?
So yes, you can actually. So where that's done is in the transaction codes entry. So the only things that will automatically match are going to be payments, check paid, deposits cleared. But there are also other things such as, you know, you get a bank fee. That's a great example. And so if you have a bank fee, you can code that as another expense or another income, and then you can actually specify the GL account that it would hit. So I'm not sure. This is the demo data. So here's the bank fees account. Distribution reference would be bank fee from Uptown Bank. And then, you know, maybe it's on my code as a fee. And that way I know that it's the bank fee. So then what happens is that when it comes in, it will say, oh, hey, this is an expense, and it would actually create that transaction as well.
And that transaction is the one that goes down at the bottom of the bank rec.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a button at the bottom that you go in and you put in any additional things that don't actually um, get marked off, but need to happen to reconcile your bank account. So that's where you're going to see that entry come in. It would be just like you doing that portion of it down at the bottom.
I'm going to see if I can pull this in real quick here. Download. So what I did was delete the history on my previous one. Oh, excuse me, I did not know that. I cannot have this screen open at the same time. Okay, and there's my header record that it couldn't process.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I go into reconcile my bank statement here, there's the deposits that it said it couldn't match, and the checks that it said it couldn't match because I had already had them checked.
Right. And so there's the adjustments button down at the bottom. This is where that fee would come into.
Yes. In my case, it did not actually come in, so I think I did not map that correctly. But yes, that is where the fee would normally come into, as you would see it in here.
Yes, the webinar recording will be available, and Judy can.
I'll send it out to everyone that's been registered for this webinar. So any other questions today? Thank you, ladies. Oh my gosh, this has just been so informative. Thank you so much. And you're getting a lot of kudos in that chat session as well. So thank you so much. And feel free to reach out to us afterwards. And we're able to help you out at support@iscorp.biz. Thank you and have a super day.
Thanks, everyone.